The two armies met at Cannae, a Roman supply depot 200 miles from Rome. It was 216 BC, over 2 years since Hannibal first arrived in Italy. As the Carthaginians assembled, they gazed at an army nearly twice their size. This was a daunting sight, even for Hannibal's mercenaries. But their loyalty was never in question.
The essential thing that Hannibal's got going for him in leading up to the Battle of Cannae is the supreme confidence his soldiers have in his command and in his decision-making. And you have to understand that confidence to understand what the Carthaginians were willing to do at the battle, which an army less confident in their commander would be unwilling to do.
The battle plan Hannibal had chosen was the simplest he had ever employed, but the results were to be as deadly as an atomic bomb.
The tactics for the battle were to persuade the Romans to advance. And Hannibal did this by drawing up his battle line with very strong wings and a rather weaker center, so that the Romans advancing towards him would push forwards and Hannibal's center would move backwards into an arc. And gradually, they would be encircled until a vast chunk of the Roman army would be surrounded by Carthaginians who would then drive inwards.
An enormous mass of over 60,000 men, cutting and stabbing and crushed in against each other, increasingly less and less able to use their weapons effectively.
There will have been confusion, chaos, panic in the Roman ranks.
It passes from battle to slaughterhouse, as the Carthaginians are essentially hacking down Romans who can no longer resist.
Thousands and thousands of Roman soldiers and their allies being slaughtered as they stood. No escape. A realization that their leaders have let them down. Yet again, the fourth time running, the Romans have been outmaneuvered, outthought by Hannibal and outfought by his men. Devastating.
Of the estimated 80,000 Roman troops that started in battle, fewer than 10,000 survived the slaughter. Hannibal had lost only 6,000 men. His victory was overwhelming. In Rome, there was panic. The state was nearer to collapse than at any other time in its history. Approximately 70,000 of the finest Roman troops were dead, and the rest taken prisoner. People even started to leave the city. Hannibal was under great pressure from his men to move quickly to take Rome, but he hesitated.
You need to appreciate not only Hannibal's strategy, which is not a strategy of destroying Rome, but a strategy of detaching Rome from its allies. A strategy which would be harmed if he marched on Rome and it didn't work. It would throw away the fruits of victory, rather than actually enable them to be harvested.
He saw, unlike many in his army, what was really important in the war, that he needed diplomatic gains, he needed to detach Roman allies, he needed to acquire friends for himself.
What Hannibal didn't know was that, despite his victories, the decision not to march on Rome would mark a turning point in the campaign against his hated enemy. Once again, the Senate changed its strategy. Hannibal was to be contained rather than faced in open battle. Rome began a campaign to win back and hold on to her allies and slowly destroy Hannibal's grip on Italy. The Carthaginian army was now at the mercy of Rome's new policy. Hannibal and his men were forced to wander around the Italian countryside, running dangerously low on provisions and reinforcements, relentlessly hounded by Roman forces. In 208 BC, Hannibal's brother launched a rescue mission, bringing another army over the Alps, but he was soon defeated by the Romans.
The first that Hannibal, down in the south of Italy, knows about what has gone on, and about the great disaster, the loss of these reinforcements, is when his brother's head is catapulted into his camp for him to see the announcement of the disaster of his dreams.
The skirmishes continued. There were defeats on both sides, but Rome was making its strength felt. Hannibal now had a powerful new adversary in the form of Scipio Africanus, commander of the Roman armies in Spain. 7 years after the Battle of Cannae, Scipio conquered New Carthage, Hannibal's original base in Spain. The Roman advance towards Old Carthage in North Africa had begun. Hannibal was recalled to his hometown. He made a miraculous escape from southern Italy to meet the Romans at Zama, close to Carthage, for the battle which would finally decide the outcome of the war. Before battle commenced, an extraordinary episode occurred. In a field close to the Roman and Carthaginian camps, two riders meet and face each other. They are Scipio, the 35-year-old leader of the Roman army, and the 45-year-old Hannibal. The two gaze at each other in silent admiration. A brief discussion takes place before the enemies turn their horses and return to their camps to prepare for battle. The battle at Zama in 202 BC marked the end of Hannibal's lifelong quest to crush the Romans. The Carthaginians were defeated, and a year later, Carthage signed a peace treaty with Rome. This was the end of the Second Punic War. Hannibal had not been home for 35 years. He became a chief magistrate and worked hard to bring about change under the new atmosphere of peace with Rome. But the Carthaginian hero was no longer welcome in his hometown. Accusations against him by political enemies were rife, and he was soon forced into exile.
The last dozen years of Hannibal's life are spent in exile at royal courts in the Eastern Mediterranean. He's a respected advisor to various kings. He's a military leader, especially in action against the Romans. But there's always the sense that the Romans are going to get their man.
Hannibal was finally trapped by the Romans in Bithynia, northwestern Turkey, in 182 BC, 34 years after his victory at Cannae. This time, there was no escape. Rather than suffer more humiliation, he took his own life. He was 65. Aged 9, Hannibal Barca swore an oath that he would hate the Romans. In the years that followed, he devoted his life to the destruction of Rome. He remained undefeated in Italy for 16 years and annihilated some of the greatest Roman armies ever fielded for battle.
Hannibal is an inspirational figure because the sheer ingenuity with which he leads his army and the sheer personal example with which he leads his army. He in many ways embodies the ideal combination of leader and very, very cunning general. It's understandable that the modern commander might wish to be seen as a modern Hannibal.